Hey, what's up, guys? This is Dante from East Coast Gridiron, and this is the official second episode of Between the X's and O's. Sorry about that. There was such a long hiatus, but it's actually your guys' fault for supporting us so much with the Sliders series and the live streams and the film studies that we do. But along with those things like the sliders and the film study, I do get questions from time to time of in-depth, how do you know players are good and what they're doing? And one of the things that I get a question about is, what is a three technique type of defensive lineman? So today we're going to get into all defensive lineman techniques and assignments. I'm going to break it down from kind of the bare bones of understanding, how to see what exactly a defensive lineman is trying to do when he's lined up, and some fronts and things like that for you guys to simply understand when you guys are watching film or are watching the games, to understand on a surface level what a defensive lineman does, and how versatile he is on the defensive line itself. Now, the first thing to understand is that there's two control points on a defensive line. And once we start talking about this more, it's going to be way easier to understand. But the first one that we're going to discuss is gap control. And the second one that we're going to discuss is man control. This could be also known as two gapping, which we'll get into exactly what that means, but you might hear that a lot on TV, like, hey, what this guy just two gap this offensive lineman, or took care of the two gap. We're going to go ahead and show you exactly what that means as far as that's concerned. So the first one up is obviously that we're going to go through is what gap control is. So understanding gap control is actually understanding at the surface level like what the gaps are on offensive line. Now, the offense may refer to these as holes. I've always referred to it as gaps as well, but just for surface level understanding, a gap is anything that's between offensive linemen, basically. So between this guard and the center, between this guard and this tackle, on the outside of this tackle, between the tackle and the tight end, and outside of this tight end, those would be all the gaps. Now, you've probably heard the term like, hey, they had stuffed the B gap. So where are those, and how can you identify it? It's actually very simple. So anything between the center and the guard on both sides, this would be referred to as the A gap. Anything that's between the tackle and the guard will be referred to as the B gap. Anything that's referred to being outside of the tackle, whether it be outside in an empty or outside where in between where a tight end would be, this would be the C gap. And occasionally you'll have a tight end set up here, and this will be called the D gap. So pretty easy to understand. There's nothing else to really rack your brain about. This is not complicated. As long as you know that this, between the center and the guard is A gap, between the guard and the tackle is a B gap, between the tackle and a possible tight end is a C gap, and anything outside of a tight end is going to be the D gap. You'll understand those terms when you start watching football and understanding what they mean by stuff in the B gap, or a linebacker stopped a running back at the C gap, or a running back took it all the way outside of the D gap. Anytime you hear those terms now, you actually understand where exactly that stuff is coming from. So the next thing is understanding the why behind gap control. And we'll also get into this about man control as well. Well, it's simple. If you can control this small space between the offensive line, it's going to be harder for a running back to basically get through and make a play. It's also going to be hard for a scrambling quarterback to be able to get through and get a first down. If you can control these and force the narrative of making a running back, especially on if you have a ton of linebackers lined up on one side of the field based off the alignment, and force them that way, your success is going to be fairly high. It's a mind game at the end of the day. It's a chess game. So if you can collapse these and show your presence, there's no way that a running back is going to be able to get through. This is the lifeline of a running back. These areas here, we've seen it time and time again. Strong running backs, swifty running backs getting in between the guard and the tackles, and going for, you know, a 20-yard gain. If you can control this, you would be well along your way of having a successful game as far as the running game is concerned. All right, so the second one up is obviously man control, aka, yes, we said it, two gapping, right? Man control is basically, and we'll get into the personnel groupings because this is going to be directly related to these. So if you're looking at a defensive lineman, it's exactly if he's lined up on the opposite side or assigned to cover a guard. Why is this important? If you can constantly do this to your quarterback, pushing this guy back into his face, it puts a lot more pressure on not only the offensive lineman to do his job if you have a strong defensive lineman doing this, but it also makes this quarterback get the ball out a lot faster. But also it shows your dominance. If three guys are constantly on their guy, it also makes these gaps in somewhat form or fashion a little bit harder to, make the gaps larger than they actually are for the play. You see a lot of defensive tackles like the Ndamukong Suhs of the world, the now Jalen Carter's the hot one. You see these type of guys that are really good man control linemen, and that's because they can oppose their will and get around quarterbacks pretty easy. Now, again, we talked about that two gapping technique, right? And you might hear this a lot. Basically, all that is making sure that this defensive tackle or defensive lineman can get here, swim, and change direction into another gap. So if you can force this guy to close this gap here by pushing him this way, it makes it a lot easier to swim, bull rush, do whatever you need to do, whatever finesse technique that you do have in your arsenal to go into another gap. That's why it's basically called two gapping. Force them into one gap, swim into the open gap, get to the quarterback. Again, the Ndamukong Suhs of the world, those type of guys, the guys that have a lot of strength, or guys, like Aaron Donald that do this religiously every single Sunday. But that's, when you hear that term two gapping, that's exactly where it comes from. So we talked about man control or two gapping, but again, why? Why is this important? We talked about it a little bit, right? If you can constantly get the pressure in your quarterback's face and minimize his pocket, he's going to get this ball out a lot faster than he wants to. And then it obviously makes the offensive lineman work hard over a period of time, which they might start letting go of their technique a little bit as the game comes on. If you can keep applying pressure to these guys over and over again, especially if you have a lot of fresh bodies that are able to rotate on your defensive line, it's going to make their day a lot harder. Which one would you like more? It really depends on the defensive scheme and what they're trying to go for. But it's also learning what type of personnel that you do have on the defensive line. This is much harder to do than gap control is, in my opinion. But to each their own. I think both of them are very, very important, and you will see a mix match of both man and gap control happen on a defensive line. And usually those defensive line are some of the best in the NFL or some of the best in the country if you're watching college football. So this is kind of the difference between gap and man control. All right, so let's get into the fun part of what the man and gap coverages or control points are, starting with man. And what this is based off a number scale. So when you think about the techniques, when they say a 3 technique, these are all based off a number scale on where the assignment is on the offensive lineman. So let's actually start with the man control guys. They're actually going to be known for being even numbers. So right lined up in front, head to head on a offensive lineman or this tight end, right? So head up on the center will be known as a 0 technique. Head up on both guards, this will happen on both sides of the ball, it would be known as a 4. Same thing with the tackles, would be, I'm sorry, as a 2. Same thing with the tackles, they'll be known as a 4. So the guards would be a 2, the tackles would be a 4, and this tight end would be known as a 6. So anything that's man or head up even numbers. All right, so let's get into the outside shoulder of a lot of these linemen, which is going to be different. These are going to be odd numbers. So here on the center, he's going to have 2 outside shoulders. Technically, he's not inside. He's going to be facing towards the outside. So this is where it gets a little wacky, but this would be a 1 technique, right? Outside the guard is going to be known as a 3. Outside the tackle will be known as a 5. And outside of this this tight end is going to be known as a 9. You're probably asking yourself, okay, so we just went from 5, 6 to 9. The way that it is, I really have no explanation for that. It's just how it's always been, how I was taught. But it'll make more sense as we run through this thing. So we're going to fill this out, and this is going to be a 5 technique as well. So when we talk about that 3 technique, it is the outside shoulder of the guard, right? Now, the inside, so we talked about outside assignment. So it's going to be odd numbers. So inside assignment will have what's called as an eye to recognize that. So what do we mean by that? So we're talking about the inside shoulder of these offensive linemen. We're going to start with the guard. This is going to be known as a 2 eye. 2 eye. Outside shoulder of the tackle, 3 eye. And then inside shoulder of the tight end is going to be known as a what? As a 7. Weird. I get it. I know it doesn't follow the path, but this is the gap or assignment numbers or personnel numbers that we recognize on the defensive line. Crazy, I get it, but this is how it is. So let's go through it one more time. The center doesn't have an inside shoulder, only outside. What we recognize, outside assignments always have odd numbers. So this is going to be the 1 technique with a 0 in the middle, head up. Guards, 2 technique, head up, 2 eye in the inside shoulder. 3 techniques are always on the outside shoulder. Tackles, 4s head up, 3 eye in the inside shoulder of a tackle, 5 on the outside shoulder. Tight ends, 7 on the inside shoulder, 6 head up, 6 technique, and a 9 technique on the outside shoulder. There is not a 8. Don't know why. I don't write the rules. This is just how I've always followed it. So guys, excuse my sloppy handwriting, but hopefully you guys understood a little bit of what was going on with the defensive lineman. This is kind of like part 1 of defensive lineman. We can start getting into fronts and things like that with the with the lineman as well. But just as like kind of a introductory into what a lot of this means by the gapping and personnel numbers, this is exactly what you look for in a defensive line. Hope you learned something new today. If you did, we appreciate the feedback in the comments. But this is Dante, everybody's favorite couch quarterback, here with another episode of Between the X's and O's. We'll see you guys later.